In the last lesson, I mentioned to you that there are many times in my graph where I will just do a bunch of my writing on a centralized page. So I showed you that example of my blog pipeline there. And in the inbox, I showed you how I was just writing things in blocks and not creating dedicated pages for every single article that I was working on. And in the next couple of lessons, I want to elaborate on that idea a little bit more. So before we jump into the tactics, I wanted to spend a few minutes just talking about some of the background here. So when I first started using Roam, I was guilty of something that I think many new Roam users are guilty of, which is creating way too many pages inside of my graph. So every time I had an article that I wanted to write or an idea that I wanted to develop, my default was to go ahead and create a new page for it. And for better or worse, Roam's really easy ways of creating pages made it very easy for me to sort of fall into this trap. And I eventually ended up with just way too many pages, page overload within my graph. I had dozens or maybe even hundreds of different pages that I was trying to look at. And I couldn't remember where to go or what I had called things. And Roam's lack of really built in organizational tools made it even more difficult. And so this became very, very overwhelming for me. And I got really frustrated actually with my process in Roam. And I started looking out into the community for better ideas to kind of keep this page overload down and simplify my process. Much of the advice that I got back from the Roam community at that time was to do everything on the daily notes page. Now, there are many people in the Roam community who still swear by this method, and I think for many people it works just fine. For me, I found that to be terrible advice, candidly. Just didn't work well for me at all. I find the daily notes page to be great for things that are truly time based. So, journaling being sort of the prototypical example of that. But for most of the writing projects that I'm engaged in, which are things like individual blog posts, blog series, newsletters, maybe podcast episode development, course development, those sorts of things where these are writing projects that I'm going to want to come back to that writing over and over again over time. I found the daily notes page to be way too fleeting. And super confusing for me, and just introduced way too much complexity with having to navigate page references or linked references and all of these things. It was just too much. So on one hand, I had struggled with creating dedicated pages for everything. On the other, the daily notes page really wasn't working well for me. And so I wrestled with this for quite a while, and I ended up coming up with a method that I use today with success that I really like called drafting pages. And these are nothing fancy at all. This is very, very simple method. These are really just dedicated pages where I do a whole bunch of writing. They're typically organized around a high level topic or a specific project. And I think either one of these, by the way, are great places to start. If you're brand new to Roam, you're trying to do more writing inside of the tool and really get a feel for it without introducing a lot of unneeded complexity into your process. Pick a topic or pick a specific project that you're working on, create one of these pages, and just start writing. So in the next lesson, I'm going to jump in. We're going to actually jump into my live graph. I've been using a demo graph in the previous lessons to try to just keep things visually streamlined and simple. But I want to actually jump in and show you some examples from my live graph. You're going to notice that these things are a little bit inconsistent from one drafting page to the next. They can be a little bit messy, and I'm totally okay with that. And I want you to take away from these lessons that it's okay if your graph is not perfect. There's a lot of courses and things out there where you're going to see like highly polished examples. And in reality, I've spoken with a lot of Roam users, and letting your graph be a little bit messy and getting comfortable with that is great. So I thought as we move forward in this section of the course, I wanted to jump into my actual graph. In the next lesson, we're going to do that. And I'll show you 3 or 4 different examples of drafting pages that I'm using so that you can get some context around these, and we'll make this idea a little bit more concrete.